The threat was silent and odorless, creeping into the room as the girl slept. The alarms never sounded. Her life now depended entirely on the dog they had written off as a lost cause. The one everyone warned was too broken to protect anyone. The noise in the shelter was a physical force. It hit Ilara in waves, a chaotic symphony of yelps, barks, and frantic scratching of claws on concrete. The air, thick with the scent of bleach and a deeper animal musk of anxiety, felt heavy in her lungs.
Rook's history
Her
is
father,
tough.
Mark,
He came
pushed
from a
her
neglect
wheelchair
case.
down the long corridor,
Needs patience
his
and a
hand a
calm
steady,
home.
reassuring weight on her shoulder.
That's why
her
we're
mother,
careful with
Sarah,
adoptions.
walked beside them, her smile tight, almost forced, as she tried to hide her concern. They passed kennels filled with kinetic energy. A pair of shepherd mixes hurled themselves against the chain link. Their barks a percussive roar. A small terrier spun in frantic circles, a blur of wiry fur. Each cage was a plea, a desperate audition for a life beyond the concrete walls. Ilara offered a small, sad smile to each one, but kept her hands on the wheels, pushing forward. "What about this one, sweetie?" Sarah pointed to a golden retriever with soft, pleading eyes. "He looks so gentle." Ilara shook her head, her gaze fixed on the end of the hall. "He's not the one." As they neared the final enclosure, the noise didn't just fade. It seemed to be absorbed by the profound stillness inside. There, on a thin gray blanket, lay a dog so immense and so motionless he seemed carved from granite. His coat was the color of a stormy sky, a brindle-striped slate gray, crisscrossed with the faint silver lines of old scars. One ear was torn, at a ragged notch in an otherwise perfect triangle. He was a Cane Corso mix, his head massive, his chest a deep barrel of contained power. He wasn't sleeping. His amber eyes were open, fixed on some distant point, but he didn't look at them. He didn't move. He just was, a monument of forgotten loyalty. "Oh goodness," Sarah murmured, pulling her cardigan tighter. Mark stopped the chair. "Ilara, maybe we should look at the others again." David Chen, the shelter director, caught up to them, his clipboard held like a shield. His expression was one of practiced sympathy. "I see you've found Rook," he said, his voice low, as if not to disturb the profound quiet. "He's a special case." Ilara couldn't look away from the dog. While the rest of the shelter screamed for attention, this one commanded it with his silence. What's his story?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He came from a severe hoarding situation," David explained, avoiding eye contact with the dog. "Dozens of them, very little human contact. Rook is what we call shut down. He doesn't engage, he doesn't play, he barely eats when we're watching." He flipped a page on his clipboard. "The evaluation notes say he's emotionally vacant. It's not aggression we're worried about. It's a complete lack of connection. He's a ghost." Mark put a hand on David's shoulder. "So, you're saying he's not a good fit for a family? For a child?" "I'm saying he needs a very specific, experienced handler.
Plastic.
And even then, the prognosis for him becoming a companion animal is poor," David finished, choosing his words
Rises
with
with
care.
ghost-like
"He's been
silence,
here for
his
6 months.
130-pound
Everyone
frame
passes him
moving
by.
with predatory
He's the
grace
unchosen
toward the
one.
parents'
I'm
closed door.
afraid
Rook stands before
everyone
Mark
saw
and
a
Sarah's
broken
door,
animal,
preparing
a
to
lost
alert
cause,
them. Clock is
a body
ticking.
without
Rook
a
senses
spirit.
the urgency
But
and
Ilara
tries
saw
to wake
something
Mark,
else.
but there's no
She wheeled
response.
herself
He nudges
closer,
again,
ignoring her
desperate to
father's
break the
soft
silence,
warning.
but Mark
She
remains
stopped
still.
just before
Time
the
is
gate,
running
her
out.
eye
Rook
level
shifts
with the silent
tactics,
giant.
gripping the comforter with
She
his
saw the
teeth and
minute,
pulling it steadily
almost
downward.
imperceptible twitch of his ear.
He braces
as
his
he
legs,
registered her
dragging the
presence.
covers off the bed
She
to
saw the
expose them to
slow,
the
steady
cold.
rhythm of his
Rook
breathing.
releases the blanket
And
and
then
lets out a
he
low,
moved.
urgent whine,
His massive
head
head
pointedly
turned,
gesturing
not
toward
with
the
a jerk,
hallway.
but with slow, deliberate
Mark wakes up in
grace.
shock as Rook
His
whines and
amber
signals
eyes left
toward
the empty
Alara's room.
space they had been
The thickening
staring
air
at
outside
and met
Alara's
hers.
door signals
There
the
was
parents'
no emptiness
realization.
there.
Rook
There
leads
was a
with grim
deep,
pace and
ancient
honor guard
gravity,
toward danger.
a quiet intelligence that
The air
seemed to be
thickens with
weighing,
unspoken fear.
measuring,
Parents
and
discover the
understanding
melting space
everything at
heater and
once.
the unconscious
His gaze
girl.
flickered from her
An
face down
odorless
to the
gas
wheels
is
of her
leaking.
chair.
The threat
a
is
brief,
critical.
analytical glance, and then back to her eyes.
In the smoke-filled
that
room,
look,
the father
she didn't
reaches
feel
for the
pity
wall.
or
The mother
curiosity.
scoops up the
She
limp
felt a
child as the
profound,
dog remains
shared
calm.
understanding of being
The father
still
rips
while
the
the world
evacuates
rushed
the room.
on.
I
"I want him,"
Rook sits
Ilara
motionless
said.
beside
The
Ilara.
words were quiet,
as paramedics
but held the
fit an
finality of a
oxygen
closing
mask
door.
over her face.
"Honey,
his body
no,"
a solid
Sarah
shield
began,
of protection.
her voice strained with worry. "You heard
And
the
so,
man.
the
dog
family
is-
finally
he's
recognized
not there.
Rook as their
He is
true
there,"
guardian
Ilara
and hero,
insisted,
the
her eyes never
unchosen
leaving the
king
dog's.
who had
"You just
always
have to be
watched
quiet
over them.
enough to see him." David Chen sighed, a sound of weary resignation. Ilara, I cannot in good conscience recommend this. He's 130 pounds of trauma. He might never bond with you. He might just exist in your house the same way he exists here. A shadow. But the decision was already made. A silent contract signed between the girl in the wheelchair and the unchosen king. She saw past the scars, and past the warnings, past the unnerving stillness. She saw a guardian waiting for someone to guard. His name is Rook, she said, a small, determined smile finally gracing her lips. And he's coming home. Rook entered their house not with the frantic joy of a rescued dog, but with the quiet solemnity of a king reclaiming a forgotten throne. He padded silently across the hardwood floor, his claws making no sound, and conducted a slow, methodical survey of the downstairs. His great head turned, amber eyes taking in the layout of the rooms, the placement of the furniture, the exits and entrances. He sniffed the air, not with the frenzied curiosity of a pet, but with the focused intensity of a sentinel learning the sense of his new territory. When his inspection was complete, he settled on the rug in the living room, a spot that gave him a clear sightline to the front door and the base of the stairs. And there he stayed. The days that followed fell into a strange, silent rhythm. David Chen's words echoed in the house, a prophecy seemingly come to pass. Rook was a ghost. He did not bark when the mail carrier came. He did not whine for food. Sarah once tossed a brightly colored squeaky toy, which landed near his paws with a pathetic wheeze. Rook tracked its arc through the air, watched it bounce, and then returned his gaze to the hallway without a flicker of interest. He was a living statue, 130 pounds of patient stillness. He became Alara's shadow. When she wheeled herself into the kitchen for a glass of water, the soft pad of his paws would follow a few moments later, and he would lie down just outside the doorway, a massive, age-brindle threshold guardian. When she sat at her desk, wrestling with algebra, he would be a dark shape on the floor behind her, positioned perfectly between her and the bedroom door. He never demanded a touch, never nudged her hand for a scratch behind his torn ear. His presence was a constant, a given, as certain as the rising of the sun. I just don't know, Sarah, Mark said one evening, his voice a low murmur from the kitchen. Ilara, just down the hall, stopped and listened. He doesn't do anything. He just watches her. It's unnerving. It's like he's waiting for something, Sarah replied, her voice laced with the worry she tried so hard to hide from Ilara. David warned us he was vacant. Maybe he was right. Maybe she needed a dog who would play with her, a dog who would show her affection. Ilara felt a familiar ache of frustration. They didn't see. They saw an absence, a void where a dog's personality should be. She saw a presence so total, so focused, it left no room for trivialities like fetch. She wheeled back into the living room, where her parents sat with forced smiles. Rook lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers for a fraction of a second before sweeping the room again. She never felt more secure. His constant quiet surveillance was not a sign of detachment. It was the deepest form of connection she had ever known. He was watching over her. He was cataloging every sound, every movement, every shift in the atmosphere around her. His silence wasn't empty. It was vigilant. One night, as autumn deepened, a chill crept into the old house. Sarah brought out an old space heater for Alara's room, a relic with a humming fan and glowing orange coils. She plugged it in near the desk. "Just to take the edge off at night, sweetie," she said, fussing with the dial. The moment the heater hummed to life and a puff of warm, dusty air filled the room, Rook, lying by the door, went rigid. His head came up, his nostrils flared, and a low sound, a barely audible huff, escaped him. He stared intently at the glowing machine, his body a coiled spring. He wasn't growling. He was analyzing. After a long minute, he seemed to classify the object as a non-threat and settled back down. But his gaze returned to it periodically throughout the evening. Ilara watched him, a small shiver running down her spine. He noticed everything. That night, long after the house had fallen quiet, Rook did not sleep, and he lay on the floor in the upstairs hallway, a dark sentinel positioned exactly between Ilara's room and her parents'. He listened. He heard the groan of the house settling, the distant rumble of a truck on the main road, the soft sigh of Sarah turning in her sleep. But mostly, he listened to the one sound that mattered, the soft, even cadence of Alara's breathing as it whispered from her open doorway. It was the baseline, the rhythm of his entire world. The silent hum of the old heater was a new, unwelcome note in the nightly symphony, and he filed it away, an anomaly to be monitored. He was not a shadow, he was a watchman on the wall, and his post was a sleeping girl's room. At 3 a.m., Rook lay awake, a living gargoyle carved from shadow and starlight. His world was a tapestry of subtle sounds, the hum of the refrigerator below, the whisper of wind against the eaves, and the soft, rhythmic hush of Alara's breathing from her room. This last sound was his anchor, the metronome of his purpose. Then, a new element entered the air. It was not a sound, but a scent. Faint, acrid, and deeply wrong. It was the smell of heat where there should be none, of plastic becoming something it was never meant to be. It came from Alara's room. Rook's head lifted from his paws, his black lips pulling back almost imperceptibly to test the air, his eyes fixed on the sliver of light under her door. Simultaneously, the metronome faltered. The steady rhythm of Alara's breath hitched, becoming shallow, then catching in a slight, fluttery sigh. The pattern was broken. The anchor was dragging. For Rook, this was not an alarm bell. It was the shattering of a sacred law. Meant the anomaly he had been waiting for his entire life had arrived. He rose without a sound, his immense weight distributed perfectly across the pads of his feet. Panic was a luxury for lesser creatures. What he felt was a cold, absolute certainty of purpose. Barking would be chaos, an indistinct cry in the night that could be dismissed. He needed to deliver a clear, undeniable message. He needed the humans. Rook moved to his secondary post, the closed door of Mark and Sarah's bedroom. He pressed his wet nose to the seam, confirming their presence within. Then, with deliberate pressure, he nudged the base of the door. It didn't budge. He adjusted, placing the solid mass of his shoulder against the wood, and pushed. The latch, not fully seated in the frame, clicked open with a soft snick. Mark and Sarah were deep in sleep. He cocooned in a heavy comforter. Rook padded to the side of the bed. A nudge with his head to Mark's dangling hand earned no response. He tried again, a more insistent push. Nothing. The clock was ticking. The flawed rhythm from Alara's room was growing fainter. Rook changed tactics. Lowering his great head, he took a gentle but firm grip on the edge of the thick comforter with his teeth. He braced his legs, dug his claws almost silently into the carpet for purchase, and began to pull. It was not a violent tear, but a steady, inexorable drag. 130 pounds of focused intention against the dead weight of sleep. The blanket slid, inch by inch, exposing them to the cool night air. Sarah shivered, murmuring in her sleep. Mark's eyes fluttered open. What the? He sat up, blinking into the darkness, in his brain struggling to process the impossible sight of the silent dog, systematically stripping them of their colors. Rook, what are you doing? Rook released the blanket, the mission accomplished. He let out a low, urgent whine, a sound so foreign from him, it was like a stone speaking. He backed away toward the door, his dark eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, and then turned his head pointedly down the hall. He did not leave. He waited for them to understand. Suddenly, Sarah was wide awake, the dog's unprecedented behavior cutting through her sleep fog like a siren. Mark, something's wrong. They scrambled out of bed and followed the dog, who led them not with frantic energy, but with the grim pace of an honor guard. As they approached Alara's room, the air grew thick and strangely heavy. Mark felt a dizzying wave of nausea when he pushed open the door. Alara was a pale figure in her bed, her face waxy in the moonlight. The old space heater near her desk was no longer glowing. A thin, almost invisible wisp of smoke curled from a melted spot on its power cord. The smell was stronger here, sharp and chemical. Mark, a structural engineer who understood the unseen dangers of a home, knew the scent instantly. He knew what odorless gas it was masking. "Sarah, get her out, now!" he yelled, his voice raw with terror. He lunged for the wall, ripping the heater's plug from the socket as Sarah scooped up their daughters. Laura's head lolled back, her eyes closed. In the frantic moments that followed, the 911 call, the cold night air rushing through newly opened windows, the wail of approaching sirens. Rook had never left Laura's side. Even when the paramedics arrived and fitted a small oxygen mask over her face, he sat beside her, his body a solid, unmoving bastion of calm. Later, after Alara was stabilized and resting, the immediate danger passed, Mark and Sarah stood in the living room. The house was cold and quiet again, but the silence was different. It was filled with a new, profound meaning. They looked at Rook, who had returned to his post by the stairs, his amber eyes watching them. The ghost, the shadow, the lost cause. He was none of those things. He was a guardian who understood that the most dangerous threats make no sound at all. His silence had never been a flaw. It was his greatest asset. It was the tool that had allowed him, and only him, to hear the subtle sound of a life beginning to fade. Sarah walked over and sank to her knees in front of the massive dog. For the first time, she reached out not with apprehension, but with a reverence that bordered on awe. She laid her hand on his broad head. Rook did not flinch. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, a silent acknowledgement. He had done his duty. His king was safe. Rook's journey shows us that true protection doesn't always roar. Sometimes it watches in absolute silence. The world warned he was a lost cause, a dog too broken to ever be a guardian. Yet, when the silent threat came and the alarms failed, he was the only one listening, proving that the most overlooked hearts often hold the most unwavering loyalty. We share stories like this on Heroic Dogs Tales to celebrate these incredible bonds. When the shelter staff and even her own parents warned her away, Alara trusted something deeper. What do you think Alara saw in Rook's eyes in that kennel that everyone else completely missed? Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you for the next tale. We'll soon explore what happens when another dog from that very same hoarding case finds a home, but must learn to guard a child who is anything but silent.